This is my 1949 Studebaker 2R5 half-ton pickup truck that me and my sister are in the process of restoring. We've actually taken it pretty much apart. Over to my left here, you'll see the bed and the cab that we removed. And then here to my front is the frame that we actually are going to talk about now. So we've gone through and we've started putting her back together, and I just wanted to share some lessons learned with you, and hopefully it'll help somebody else out there. And as a reference here, this is the front of the vehicle, this is the passenger side, this is the driver's side. This first cross member you see here is actually where the radiator mounting bracket goes, and there's the hole where it gets mounted into. So that's where your radiator gets mounted. And then as you move over to the side here and you look down here, you'll see the mounting bracket where the front of the front leaf springs mounts to the vehicle right here. And then moving over to the next cross member, I just want to point out that this is a Type A Studebaker. It's got Type A gauges and it's got a Type A frame. And the reason you know that is because its front cross member here is 3 pieces. You got one piece here mounted to the frame, you got a cross member here, and then another piece right here that's mounted to the frame, and then both of these are also bolted to this cross member. This is where the engine mounts in the front. You got an engine mount point there, and you got an engine mount point there. Again, it's a Type A Studebaker. Moving back to the next cross member, this is actually where the transmission mounts and where the emergency cable goes through here. And then if you look out here, this is also the mounting bracket for the rear of the front leaf springs. I just put that on there for reference. The next thing we have mounted, and we will later on, is the front cab mounting bracket, which is this right here. There's one on this side, one on the other side. There's 4 holes right here that it mounts to. And on the inside of the frame, what you'll have is this flat piece of metal, about 1/4 inch with the 4 holes, that gets bolted to your cab mount from the inside. What I did want to point out though is there's a reason for this hole being here in this thing, and that's because right in here is where your clutch and brake shaft comes through, that your clutch and brakes hook onto and rotate. And this is the shaft right here. You can see it right here, and this is my clutch still hooked to it. But what you can see is here's the nut that goes on the outside. This has to be mounted before you can put that cab mount back on, because it actually, the nut is on the inside of the cab mount. I just wanted to point that out right quick as something to be aware of. Moving on back to the next cross member, this is where the rear of the cab gets mounted. There are 2 mounting points. You got one right here where it is threaded, and you have the bolt coming down through the cab that mounts here. And then this one here, there are no threads. You just have a longer bolt that goes through with nuts underneath there that secure the cab to this point. Next cross member is an intermediate cross member, but it's also at the position where the front of the rear springs get mounted. And this is the mounting bracket there that you can see for the front of the rear springs. And then moving all the way to the back here, to this back cross member here, you have the hanger mount here for the rear of the rear leaf springs, gets mounted to this spot right here. Going up to this bracket, and you see this other cross member bracket here, this is where the spare tire goes. It gets up across there, it gets mounted up there, and I do have the spare tire mount to put it in, and we'll mount the spare tire. Couple things to consider. This is a great idea by my sister. I have these tables here. They have 1,000-pound capacity, and so she got to looking at it and mentioned let's put it up on these tables, and so we did, and it made it really easy to work without having to squat down and stoop a lot, putting these bolts and things in there. So it's a great idea to do that. This frame isn't that heavy, and so it was well within the capabilities of these tables to handle the frame. The other thing I did was anytime I could look up, down, or up, I wanted to see the bolt heads and not the nuts, just to keep the threads from being exposed to the outside elements as much as possible. So here all the threads are on the inside of the frame, and hopefully that will keep them from rusting up and going bad. Other differences being, when I looked at the cross members, since these are hidden by the bed or the cab, normally you would see them when you crawled underneath there, so the heads are underneath where the road dust and stuff is, and the threads are up on the top being protected. So I just kind of looked at, as I put these bolts in, how I put them in to protect the threads as much as possible. Everywhere you see a bolt, that's where a rivet was. And the rivets were 3/8 inch rivets, so all these bolts are 3/8 inch bolts. They're all 24 thread count, they're fine thread, and they are different sizes. For the cross members here, the length of the bolts are 7/8 of an inch. And then for anywhere where it's mounted to the frame, because it's a little bit thicker, the metal is, I used 1-inch bolts to hang to the frame. And in some cases, especially like up front here with my front mounting bracket, because the thickness of the bracket was such, I ended up using 1 1/4 bolt to secure those there. So those are the 3 size bolts that I've been using so far: 7/8, 1 inch, and 1 1/4, all 3/8, all fine thread, 24 count. And the last thing I want to talk about is putting these cross members in. We ended up having to adjust what we're doing, because when we first did this, we put this rear member together, put it to the frame on it, and we did the same up here at the front. But when we squeezed that in, it made us not have enough room to put these in, and so you had to try to go at a diagonal, and we didn't want to do that. So what we ended up doing was we just kind of pulled the frame apart, keeping these in here as much as we could, and it allowed us to create space between the frame, and then we were able to just kind of slide these in there without having to do any hammering and stuff. Another thing we had to do is, because of the powder coating, you got another layer there, and so it kind of narrowed underneath there. We had to squeeze these together with some clamps to get them to slide up underneath there. So it worked out really, really well. Just kind of pulling the frame apart a little bit and then putting her back together once we got these cross members in for that system. So I think that's about it, and hopefully this will help somebody else out there working on their Studebaker. Thank you very much. Bye.